Right now, I'm taking in a beautiful view of the Grand Tetons from my homemade truck camper. The only problem is, the camper doesn't exist yet, and I'm actually in a grocery store parking lot. Let's fix that. I love going on road trips in my Toyota Tacoma, but camping in it is kinda horrible. Either I've gotta sleep in the 5-foot bed, which is super uncomfortable and ruined by a single rainy night, or I have to recline the front seat, which is even less comfortable and makes me look like a sleep paralysis demon to those passing by.
And sure, I could buy a camper shell like a normal person, or I could do what I always do and severely overcomplicate the situation by building yet another variation of a tiny living space. You guessed it, we're gonna build a freaking cabin in the back of this bitch.
As usual, I drew up a rough sketch of what I want this thing to look like on a Subway napkin.
The first step is to make a box that will fit in the back of the truck, and for that, I'm cutting out 4 pieces of 1/2-inch plywood.
And to fasten these pieces together, I'm gonna kind of frame it in reverse.
Which is my stupid way of saying I'm using wood glue and screws to fasten the boards together, then putting 2x2s on the inside that'll provide both structural support and a nice trim that'll look super aesthetic. Whatever that means.
So as we go into building the rest of the frame, there's a couple things that are really important to me. First off, I really want to be able to sleep in here fully stretched out, which is problematic seeing as how I'm one Mr. Beast tall. That's right, we're the same height. We also have the same sub count. You know, give or take a few. Who's counting? And just to save on space, I think I want to put the bed width-wise in the back here, which means each wing needs to be about 19 inches long to account for my height.
Which is wide enough to fit me, but narrow enough for me to see behind my truck and drive safely.
The other function I really wanted out of this is a space to sit in the front, and this seems like a perfect little bench, so I think we nailed it. And by we, I mean I nailed it. You're just sitting there watching a YouTube video.
Then I cut out these little triangle pieces that'll help give some extra support to the wings, but the main support will be the sides of the truck bed, so these are more there just to ensure a secure attachment.
So the reason I'm now looking like the average Waffle House customer in northern Florida is because we're about to get nasty. Yeah, we're about to get real nasty. We need to paint the bottom with bed liner. I don't know what you thought I meant by that. And as the name implies, this is meant to be the coating for truck beds, and it's what gives truck beds that kind of hard, rubbery, grippy finish. I'm putting this on the bottom of the camper where it'll be in contact with the truck, and this will help protect it and keep it from sliding around.
It's a brand new day, and the bed liner is all dry. Bed liner? I hardly even know her, dude.
I'm also gonna go ahead and put the second support for the bed in here because that's a lot easier to do right now, and I already know how wide the bed's gonna be.
And now, you might as well call me Red Bull, cause I just gave this thing wings.
Okay, I don't know what's more concerning, the fact that I'm back in this outfit or the fact that I'm drinking coffee and it's 8:30 p.m. Either way, the reason I'm dressed like this is we're about to put some spar varnish on here. And I'm putting spar varnish on the sides of the box and the undersides of the wings to waterproof it because this whole area will be a whole lot harder to access after I'm done framing the rest of the cabin.
All right, so now that we have a solid base, it's time to frame the actual cabin. We're gonna build a skeleton for this thing, cause it's spooky season. I'm just joking, it's May. That's like the literal opposite of spooky season. So I've been thinking a lot about the shape of this thing, and after hours of sitting down and using calculus to carefully plan out the curvature of the roof, I decided to just eyeball it and hope for the best. That's a lot easier than doing math. I wanna be able to sit right here without hitting my head, so looks like 5 feet, 28 inches. I don't know, that should work. Then I'll put 2 more beams in the middle, one on each side of the window. And I want this one right here to be the tallest because then water can run off in both directions. So I started measuring and cutting out the upward beams and cut little notches in them for the rafters to sit in later.
There's not a chance this is the best way to do this. I already know there's a bunch of suburban dads sitting on their deck in a pair of white New Balances watching this and absolutely screaming at me.
And once all the beams were complete, I attached them to the wings with wood glue and screws. We're finally making some upward progress. This thing actually looks so stupid right now. I'm gonna be driving down the street and people are gonna play ring toss with my truck. So now I need to put a couple more 2x2s on this side to make the wall nearest to the truck. And I need to put a couple 2x2s right here, one on each side of the door. Okay, now this thing looks terrifying. It looks like it's gonna come alive in the middle of the night and start walking. So in an effort to 1, make this thing look less scary, and 2, make it more structurally sound, I'm gonna put some more framing between these 2x2s. Let's get it. I feel like I say that every time I transition to a new scene. I need some new stuff to say. Let's rock and roll. Now we're cooking with peanut oil. So I cut out some more 2x2s and started adding more and more support beams to the framing, in places like the front and around where the windows will go.
Howdy.
Hi, David, how you doing?
Pretty solid, how are you?
And I also started cutting out some angled pieces so I could incorporate triangles into the frame to make it stronger. Let me tell you a little about my thought process with the framing. Squares.
They are weak, they are boring, they are unstable. Squares are the Spirit airline of the geometry world. I'm not having it. Triangles, on the other hand, are so stable that one day I'm gonna come out here and there's gonna be a horse living in this thing. Welcome to the cowboy state, buckaroo.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Why does this thing look like it belongs on a standardized test? If David places one 2x2 at a 90-degree angle and one 2x2 at a 45-degree angle, at what mile of his road trip will the whole dang thing crumble to the ground? All right, we are all done making this spooky, scary skeleton, baby. Now it's time for beams going across the roof. So the goal for the roof is to make it curved both this way and this way. That way, all the water that falls on it will just flow right off the four corners. And to do that, I'm gonna make this rafter the most curved, and this one a little less curved, then the tallest one the least curved, basically flat, and then this one a little more curved than this one. And that probably sounds confusing, but that's only because it is confusing, and I'm bad at explaining things. And to make the rafters for the roof, I have a bunch of 1x6 boards and a dream. And Justin Bieber flow again. Oh gosh. Let's get to work.
So then I cut all the rafters to size and started measuring out the curvature.
And to make the curves nice and consistent, I'm tracing this ruler that I strung together using paracord. It's definitely not the best way to do things, but it's a way to do things.
I cut out the curves with a jigsaw and smoothed everything out with a detail sander.
Sander? I hardly even.
And once curvature was cut, I had 4 rafters ready to support the roof. Then I put them in place using wood glue and screws. And I gotta say, this turned out a lot better than expected, but I'm not even sure what I expected.
This is kind of sick. Feels like Little House on the Prairie.
That moment when you gotta make a YouTube video at noon and meet Mr. Edwards at the lumber mill at 1. I'm not using house wrap or any of that jazz for this like I did with the tiny home, so the next step is I'm gonna go over this entire thing and add a layer of spar varnish to just weatherproof the entire frame, because I feel like the more weatherproof this thing is, the better.
Cock-a-doodle-doo, my sweet YouTube people. Or cock-a-doodle-don't. Maybe it's just not the morning for you. It is morning, and we have a nice, glossy, waterproof frame. I just want to pet this thing like a big dog. That's kind of weird. Now it's time for siding, and I'm using the exact same tongue and groove boards that I used on the tiny home. If it ain't fixed, don't break it. However that goes. Do I look like a poet? But these work super well. They fit together like a puzzle piece. I love them. Let's get to work.
The next step is to measure and cut out all these siding boards that'll make up the walls, and I did this one side at a time.
It's time to stain the boards, and this time I'm using a lighter color than I used for the tiny home. Never let them guess your next move. This is a stain and poly 2-in-1 mix. The color I'm using is classic oak, which is also what you say to your buddy named Oak when he tells a good joke. Classic oak.
I covered each and every board in a nice even coat of this sweet, sweet wood sauce, which is probably the most tedious part of this entire project, but you better believe it's worth it.
That looks so good. That might be my new favorite color to stain. This stuff goes hard.
And I secured all the boards with these exterior trim screws. All the pieces fit together perfectly.
There we have it. Looks like a cute little log cabin.
And at this point, you might be thinking that the camper is gonna be crazy heavy because I'm building it out of wood. And sure, it's no fiberglass or aluminum design, but between using 2x2s for the frame and the thinnest boards I could while maintaining structural integrity, I'd say it's not bad. We'll have a full breakdown of weight, fuel efficiency, and cost later on, but me and a friend could move it around by ourselves throughout the whole process. And to cut the curved pieces, I once again traced the ruler, hit them with the old jigsaw, and sanded things smooth. I also used the jigsaw to cut these little notches, so I'll have a groove to put the spine in. This will be really useful for mounting the roof, which is next up on the to-do list.
All right, there we go.
Kind of looks like a big wooden turtle shell.
I'm gonna be going down the road and people are just gonna be like, oh, look at David, the big dumb turtle. If you're a turtle, I have nothing against you. I'm just saying, I'm no turtle. Oh gosh, dude. Anyways, let's put this roof on.
For the roof, I used 1/4-inch plywood to keep it light. First, I cut it roughly to size on the table saw, then I clamped it onto some wood glue and started screwing it in place. I used a jigsaw to trim off the excess plywood and sanded it down just how Papa likes. Then I did the exact same thing on the other side. And since I've already explained everything, I was gonna tell you guys my dad joke about construction, but I'm still working on it. I used my metal cutter to take off the excess screws poking through, and the roof was looking ready to protect me from the elements.
But now, how are we gonna keep the rain from turning this into a big ol' soggy hunk of wood? Big ol' soggy hunk of wood. That was my nickname in high school. Well, I want to keep the roof's wooden texture because I feel like that would look super classy. So instead of using roofing materials, I'm just gonna put a layer of clear fiberglass over the top. But before I can fiberglass the roof, I need to stain it because right now it's looking so white, I'm worried it's gonna start putting raisins in my potato salad. I mean, holy smokes, that thing's even whiter than me. And that's saying something.
And the stain I'm using for the roof is antique walnut. I was really hungry the last time I was in Home Depot, and this sounded pretty tasty.
So I slathered on a few coats of that wood sauce, and she was looking mighty good.
It's time to fiberglass the roof, and let me tell you, this stuff is nasty, nasty, bad, bad, bad. This stuff is more disgusting than a person who puts milk in their bowl before cereal. Absolutely despicable. So there's two components to applying fiberglass, the fiberglass cloth and the fiberglass resin. So what I'm doing is laying the cloth out over the top and then applying resin until it gets saturated and becomes invisible. This is actually the process they use on those wooden canoes. And this thing is pretty much a canoe. I mean, the only real difference is that it's flipped upside down and not a canoe at all.
I put a few more coats of fiberglass sauce on, sanding it between each coat, and the final texture looked glossy smooth.
This finish turned out so nice. I love it. It's like you're petting what's an animal that's really smooth? Pumpkin? I don't know. Now my Tacoma's got an absolute dumpy. Look at that thing. Now we're gonna install windows. Personally, I'm more of a Mac user, but I guess these will get the job done.
Starting with the sides of the camper, I used the jigsaw to cut out slots that the windows fit in perfectly. I just traced them. And in these holes, I'm installing sliding RV windows by putting a bead of silicone around the edges and securing them in place with screws. And these windows are kind of on the pricey side, but they're tempered, tinted, and open smoothly, so I'd say they're worth it.
I put some round windows in the front because I thought that would be chaotic. I think these were meant for a sailboat or something like that.
These look so cool, look at that.
It's like I'm in a submarine. So now that the windows are done, it's time to focus on the door. And for this, I'm doing a double Dutch door, which is where there's gonna be a bottom section that swings out and then an upper section that swings up. Why it's called the double Dutch door is beyond me. I was just in the Netherlands and I didn't see a single one of those doors. All I'm saying is we need to keep an eye on the Dutch government and their doors. Clearly they're up to no good. And the reason I'm doing this style of door is if I had a full door, somebody could just come up in the middle of the night while you're sleeping, close the tailgate, and then you're stuck in there. Then you'd have to make the dumbest phone call ever.
Hey, bud.
Hey man, could you give me some help with my truck?
Yeah, what happened? Did you lock your keys in or something?
I wish. I started on the door by cutting 1/2-inch plywood to size and tracing out a cool design on it.
I used a miter saw to cut out pieces of pine at 45-degree angles at increasingly larger and larger sizes. And I laid every single piece out on the door just to make sure it all fits.
Now that we've cut out all the pieces for the door design, it's time to stain them. And I have 4 different types of stain I'm using. Natural, dark walnut, golden pecan, American walnut. Nothing more American than walnuts, baby. And to figure out what stain pattern looks best, I actually visualized it using Photoshop. That way I know for sure the stain pattern I use is gonna look good. I mean, no promises, but...
And I lathered all 4 wood sauces on the pieces like they were baby back ribs. One piece at a time, I attached all the boards to the door using copious amounts of wood glue and a few screws in the backside.
And the result was a piece of art that looked like it belonged on a millennial mom's Pinterest vision board.
I was pretty stoked with it.
I am so hyped with how this turned out. That is so sick. All that work was totally worth it.
So I did the exact same thing for the lower door and just made it a continuation of the upper door. Same cuts, same sauces, same everything. After I was done assembling the lower door, I lathered both pieces in spar varnish to keep the water out. Lots of waterproofing sauce. Then I put the doors on hinges, which is a process that took 3 hours in real life, but 6 seconds in this video. I used the miter saw to cut out some little pieces of trim to put around the door, which would serve as a doorstop and help keep things watertight. I also added these gas struts, which open the door with ease and keep it open whenever I want, like if I want to look out at the beach.
There we go. It's adorable. Gotta admit, it looks a little more hippie-ish than anticipated, but it's all good. It just looks like Scooby and the gang got a new whip. Like, oh man, Scoob, we're gonna go hunt some monsters in this. Well, Raggy, want monsters? Like, and we can get an extra large pizza. My neighbor definitely just saw that and went inside. Understandably so. Understandably so. Next, I install these little locking latches, and they lock into either position so nobody can shut me in at night.
I also put on this little handle/knocker deal.
Knocker? I hardly even...
It was looking good. Now it's time to add trim, so I cut these angled boards to size and stained them with the dark sauce. I secured all these down with trim screws and also added some trim boards across the crests. It's a vibe. And just like that, the exterior is complete and looking amazing, so now it's time to move to the inside.
Now that the exterior is all done, it's time to cook up the interior. Right now, the interior is a blank canvas, and I need to make like Bob Ross and paint some happy little trees in here. And by happy little trees, I mean sliced up pieces of trees. Ain't nothing happy about what's happening here from the trees perspective, holy smokes. So the first thing I'm gonna start with in here is the roof, and I'm gonna build it out of some cedar paneling I had left over from the tiny home
I
build.
measured out the cedar, cut it to size in the miter saw, and piece by piece, I started lining the roof with it. All the meanwhile running wiring through the roof for the 12-volt puck lights, which are the exact same ones I used for the tiny home. And while I was in here, I got to feel what the inside would be like on a hot day, and it wasn't too bad as long as the windows were open, but I might add that a hot day here in Wyoming is anything over 70 degrees.
Boom! We have power, y'all! This looks so cozy, especially from the outside. I love it. I gotta say, this whole process was made significantly easier by the fact that I've already done this in the tiny home. This ain't my first rodeo. It's my second rodeo.
Next, I cut out trim for the inside of the circular windows, which only took about 40 tries and a whole lot of late night coffee, but you better believe your boy made it happen. Then I cut out cedar for the walls, and I made sections that fit in between the framing. The only real reason I did it this way is I thought it would look cool, and spoiler alert, it did. As I moved along the walls, I secured the cedar using a whole lot of interior trim screws. This looks so much better than it did before. And once I was done with the walls, I also covered the front of the storage box, which I also made a hinged lid for a little earlier on. And after covering the door from top to bottom, cedar on the interior was totally done. On the inside of the door, I installed a little handle and latches so it can be locked from the inside. That'll keep out Sasquatch and creepy people. Hopefully.
Whew! I love the scent of fresh cedar. We're getting pretty close to finish now. All we really need to finish now is the electrical.
So I'm wiring a 12-volt system to power the lights and some USB outlets, but I'm actually not adding any solar panels because I have something that'll be way more efficient: the power generated by the truck. First, I'm connecting some 4-gauge wires to the truck battery, which is directly charged by the alternator. These wires then run underneath the truck and up to the camper. The wires enter the camper via this little connector that's made for a boat motor, and this will ensure that everything stays totally waterproof and is easy to disconnect when not in use. Once inside, the wires connect to a DC to DC battery charger, which regulates the charging of the 100 amp hour 12-volt lithium-ion battery. This is 1/3 the size of the battery I used in the tiny home, which makes sense because I'm pretty sure this camper is 1/3 the size of the tiny home. And I also put this little shut-off switch in the circuit so we can shut off connection to the car battery when not driving, so the battery doesn't get drained. I'm connecting several different things to the battery, so I'm wiring the battery to bus bars and a 12-volt fuse box, to which I'm wiring the lights via this dimmer switch and 2 USB outlets that I can use for charging stuff.
I tested the system out and was stoked to see that both the lights and the USB chargers work.
That didn't take up a whole lot of space. We still have the entire rest of this thing to use for storage. Now that the wiring's done and fully functional, all that's left to do is furnish and decorate the inside of this thing. Let's turn it into an absolute vibe.
I cut out a piece of this rubber mat to use for flooring, and then I ran string lights around all the corners. They're a necessity. Then I put a nice little cot-sized bed in place and furnished it with a blanket and 2 pillows.
My big ol' ostrich legs fit.
I put these seat cushions on the benches so I'll have a little workstation, and these can also be pulled over this board I cut out to turn it into a queen-size bed. Lots of space, and the vibes are complete. The only thing that could possibly make my cabin any better is a front lawn.
This right here is my front lawn. Perfect for barbecuing, lawn games, or shaking your fist to tell those darn kids to get off of it.
Well folks, the camper build's all done, and I can't wait to see where this will take me in the future. It's gonna be one wild ride.
Now, I'm sure there's a few things you want to know. How much does the camper weigh? How does it affect fuel efficiency? And how much did it cost to build? I took it to a weigh station and measured 5,100 pounds. Subtract the weight of the truck and myself, and we're sitting at just over 400 pounds. So hauling the camper around is kind of like having a female grizzly bear in the bed of my truck. Not as bad as expected. And I did a fuel efficiency test where the truck got 20 miles per gallon by itself and 16 with the camper. Just to put things in perspective, the truck gets 7 miles per gallon when hauling my tiny home, so I'll take it. As for cost, here's a breakdown for you, and everything adds up to a grand total of $3,300. Given that most nice overlanding campers run for 10 or 20 grand, I'd say that's pretty good. Not to mention the fact that mine's made infinitely more cool by the fact that I built it with my own hands. I'm so glad I did this. I couldn't be happier with how this build turned out. Having my own little cabin that I can bring with me everywhere is just so cool. Road trips are never gonna be the same. So now the only question is, where will the road lead me next?